Hello E39 source. Today I'm going to begin the manual conversion of my black E39 528. It's a 1996 with just under 200,000 Ks on it. I was planning on doing this beside my house, but limited space, so I've come down to basically a barn. There's no lighting, so I apologize for the lack of lighting during this conversion. Show you the parts that should need for making it manual. Obviously, a manual gearbox, a manual flywheel with the clutch, pressure plate, etc., the shifter linkage, a shift boot. I have not yet got a shift knob, and the clutch pedal assembly, and a manual drive shaft. The reason you need a manual drive shaft as opposed to an automatic drive shaft is the length is different because the manual gearbox is shorter than the automatic gearbox. First step, jack the car up. Got axle stands for the back because the rear wheels do need to be able to turn when you're moving the drive shaft to take out the drive shaft bolts. Front wheels, they're going up on, I don't remember where I put them, these here. Bring front up on these, a little bit more secure than axle stands, and I have one extra one that I'm going to stick under the back of, probably under the diff, so if it does come off the axle stance for some reason, it's on there. When I'm going to be under a car for 2 or 3 days, hopefully it's not that long, but potentially, I don't want it to fall on me, so take every precaution and be safe. I will be back as soon as the car is up in the air. Got it up in the air, and now have a look underneath. Sorry for the close-up, there's not a huge amount of room under here. What we need to remove is the exhaust, and hopefully you can see it. It's a little bit clearer in person than showing up on the camera. You know, this heat shield here, it's underneath the exhaust and basically stops or reduces the amount of exhaust that, or the heat from the exhaust that goes into the cabin. So we're going to take off the exhaust. As far as I can see, there's this bolt here, the manifold bolts there and there, so there'll be 6 there. That one. There's, there we go, 4, 2 there, and 2 there, so 4 that hold that plate on. And then there'll be like hangers at the back. So once the front comes off, it'll either slide back or forward or something and disconnect at the back. If it's complicated, I'll show it, but it's, as I remember, it's pretty easy. So take those off. Okay, we've got the heat shield and the exhaust out. Next step is to remove the drive shaft. Now for the exhaust, there were 6 15mm bolts there, or nuts rather, sorry, and the hanger for the center of the exhaust were 4 13mm bolts there, and there were 2 13mm bolts holding on the rear of the exhaust at the very back. What we're going to do now is take off the 4 bolts here on this flange, 4 nuts there, the 2 nuts here that hold on the hanger bearing, and then there'll be some bolts at the back. So we'll take that off. Now a tip when you're doing this is have someone in the car to put it in park or in gear, hit the brake, whatever combination of those works, to allow this to rotate and then lock it in place so it doesn't move when you're trying to take these off. The drive shaft is now out, as you can see. What we're going to do now is remove the transmission. Now, basically the steps are remove the bell housing bolts, remove the shift linkage, remove the oil cooling lines, and then disconnect wiring. I almost forgot that. Disconnect the wiring, and then remove this and slide the transmission back and out. What we're going to do first of those steps is remove the bell housing bolts. Then the reason we're going to do it in that order is bell housing, shift, oil, and then this mount. This mount, the bolts are really easy to get to. They're just under this. You can just bend back this heat shield a little bit. The bolts are just there. If you undo the oil cooling lines before you undo the bell housing bolts, you're going to have oil dripping on you the whole time you're trying to get to the bell housing bolts. So that's what we're doing in that order. Now, as far as getting to the bell housing bolts, on a 540, the top ones especially are really, really hard to get to. I've had to remove an automatic transmission from a 540. They are hard to get to, possible hard to get to. On the 318 I did the manual conversion on, they were also hard to get to, but not as hard as on the 540. With a little bit of creative use of extensions and stuff, you can get to it. On this car, it's looking really, really easy. Mainly because I can see that bolt right there. I am very happy about this. Now on the 528, because it's the same engine as on the 328, but in a bigger chassis, you have more room. I can fit my, if I can get on camera, my fist up here between the firewall and the back of the engine. That means I can get a ratchet in there. Now for the very top bolts, this one here I'll probably do from underneath, but the very top one on the other side, I'd probably do that from the engine bay, which has pretty good access for that. So, 5 Series with the 6-cylinder engines, real easy. 540s, not so easy. So we're going to take those out. It's looking pretty easy. We're going to take off the oil cooling lines with a drain pan underneath, because we don't want oil everywhere and be sitting in oil for the rest of this project. For the shift linkage, basically you loosen, I believe it's, let's see if we can get it right, this nut here. That nut loosens, it slides out of there, and then you undo this, sorry, camera, that nut, and then the shift line comes out, and it'll just hang until you take out the shift lever in the car, and then just these bolts. So I'm going to take out the bell housing bolts, and then show you the next step. One more thing I forgot to mention is you'll need to disconnect the torque converter from the flywheel. Now the way you do that on the 6-cylinder engines is you look up here on the side. It may be on the other side if you have left-hand drive. This is right-hand drive, so it is on the driver's side. And there's a little rubber mount, if I can find it here. This is what it looks like. There's this little rubber mount that goes in that hole there. And through that hole you'll see the bolts. There should be 4 of them on the torque converter going through the flywheel to the torque converter. What you'll do is, if you don't see one centered in that hole, you need to rotate the bolt on the front of the engine that turns the crankshaft until you see a bolt come into view. Loosen that one, rotate it until get the next one, and so on. There should be 4. Disconnect those, and then finish disconnecting the bell housing bolts. One more thing with disconnecting the bell housing is there are the bolts on this side. I've already removed these 2 and that one, the eTorx bolts. There is also an I believe it's an 8mm bolt. There you can see it just to the side of that hole there, and there may be one on the other side. I think there's 2 8mm bolts. That one and one other one somewhere, but there's at least that one. It won't come away from the engine without those being disconnected, so don't forget those. My mistake. There's only 3 torque converter bolts. At least I can only find 3 torque converter bolts. You will know when all the torque converter bolts are out, because when you turn the engine from the crank on the front, the flywheel plate will move, but the torque converter can move separately. You can actually kind of turn the torque converter through here. So that there's the torque converter, that there is the flywheel. Anyway, got all the bell housing bolts out, except for that bolt. I still have to take that one out, and then that should be ready to come off. So what I'm going to do, disconnect the oil lines, the shift linkage, and this mount here, which is the 4 bolts, 2 on each side, and it should just pull away. Now, before you undo all 4 of these bolts, make sure you have a jack under here. It is recommended that you use 2 floor jacks, rolling ones. If I can see mine. Mine's down there. You can see it kind of red by the wheel. I only have 1 here at the moment, so I'm just going to use 1. I'm going to get a block of wood to spread the weight, try to center it, and you don't want this to be lifted up. You want it to be so it just comes down onto the jack, and then let it kind of come down and back. It's pretty easy, but tricky at the same time. And that's pretty much it. So I'm just going to get this all disconnected and hopefully taken off of here. And the transmission is removed. Look at that. You wouldn't believe how happy I am at this point that that transmission is finally gone and done with. We are well on the way to making this manual. Now, one thing I'd just like you to notice is this here. This is all pre-cut for a manual transmission because they didn't want to have to make separate bodies for a manual transmission and an automatic transmission, so the bodies are actually identical. With the E39 and also all the E36s I've seen. The one exception that I do not know about is the 540 wagon. My guess is that it has this as well. I cannot guarantee that because I have heard that the 540 wagons only came in automatic, so it's possible that they didn't have the pre-cuts. So I can't comment on that, but the 540 that I used to have had this pre-cut, even though that was an automatic, factory automatic. This one did. Every other 5 Series I've seen has that pre-cut. We'll cut that all out in a minute and I'll show you it. And we'll look at the brake pedal assembly and see if there's a pre-cut for the clutch as well. There is on the E36s. Everything's pre-cut. Everything lines up. It's got all the mounts, everything. Automatic or manual, they all have the manual mounts. What we're going to do now is remove the automatic flywheel. The flywheel is, of course, different for the manual transmission, so we're going to take these bolts out. They look roughly like 18s or 19s. I'm not quite sure which, but we'll take those out. They are on there quite tight, so you need a good bit of force. If you have an air gun, this would be a great time to use it, but I don't have air here, so just do it the old-fashioned way. I'll be back when that's off, and we'll go inside and remove the automatic shifter before we put on the new transmission and get this thing done. Alright, we've got the flywheel bolts off and that triangle plate that goes on the front. And we'll take this off as well. Put that over there. Alright, now this here we'll just pull off. It's kind of wedged on there. It's pretty tight, so you might need to get like 2 pry bars behind that or something. Pull that off. That'll come off pretty easily. What I've done here is I've removed that little piece of foam insulation, sound deadening stuff that was over this. And you'll see the part of the car that holds the manual shift linkage. In here is a little, well, what we'll mount in here is a little rubber bushing. I'll show you when I put in the gear shift linkage. And that holds the back of the shifter, and obviously the shifter goes up through here. This here looks like the base of the shifter that's in it now for the automatic. So we'll go up top, pull out the automatic shifter and this cable here, and get that all ready for manual and swap flywheels and get the new transmission in. Okay, so up here what we're going to do is we have to remove this and this here. Now the way you remove this is basically the same way you remove a manual shift knob. You grab it really hard and pull up really hard. Now what I recommend, I did this on a 540 once, is put one hand over the top and then the other hand underneath it like that. Have one hand over the top, because when you pull up it's going to want to come up and then back towards your face, and if you aren't real careful, when it comes loose you're going to smack yourself in the face with it, and that really would hurt. I haven't done it, but it would really hurt, and I came really close to doing it. Once that's off, I believe you can just get under here and this, like, kind of get your finger under here and just this lift up without having to take off the whole panel. I will eventually take off the whole panel because I want to carbon wrap it, but right now I just want to get the shifter out. And when I did the E36, I didn't have to take the console apart or anything. I just took the bolts out from in here without removing the console. So we'll see if I can do the same thing here, but if I have to take it out, I'm not too bothered because I'm going to carbon wrap this anyway. And yes, you can remove this without taking apart the console. And the shift knob on this car came off way easier than it did on the other car, and probably easier than it should have. So, but that was good for this. we got that pulled off, got this loose. What we're going to do now, disconnect the wiring going to the shift boot here, and then it looks like there's 3 10, maybe 12 mil bolts holding in the shift linkage. We're going to pull those out and should be ready for manual. And the shifter is removed. Now, as you can see, I did end up having to remove the center console. The reason for that was to get to this bolt here, and I think it's that bolt there. It was way easier with the console removed. No worries, because I have to carbon wrap that anyway, so it just made me go ahead and get it done. It's also really dirty in here, so it needs a good vacuum. And it's really gross down in there. There's enough coins to probably have a substantial amount of scrap metal value. Anyway, this wiring here will need to be looked through to find which wires will go for the reverse light, and also which wires we need to use to make it think it's in park so it'll start. Hopefully this will work the same way I did the 318, which was just making it think it was in park all the time. Obviously it still had the chance warning light, so I'm going to try to do the same kind of thing with this, but we'll see how it goes. The step now is to put on the manual flywheel and the manual transmission and put the shifter linkage through here, and hopefully everything fits. Then we will take out the pedals and put in the new pedal assembly. What I was hoping to do now was install the clutch line and pedal assembly before putting in the gearbox. The reason for doing that is if we have a look in here, well, there is a lot more room in here than in a 328, 325, or if you have a V8 5 Series. It's still a little bit tight, and it makes it a lot easier installing the pedal assembly and putting in the clutch line if the gearbox is out of the way and you can get under there and have lots of room to work. I am no longer going to be able to do that because of the clutch master cylinder. Now, if you are replacing lots of parts on the transmission for long service life, etc., now is the time to do it before you put in the transmission, obviously. A lot of people get new clutch, new pressure plate, and possibly even a new flywheel when they do this. Unfortunately, I cannot afford that. Eventually I will be doing that and possibly upgrading to a performance clutch, etc. This is a get-checked gearbox, and, well, it's a good gearbox and should handle the power very well. I would eventually like to go to a ZF gearbox and even replace the engine in the car from a 2.8 to the 3.2 M3 motor. So, using a used clutch that seems to be in decent condition and used bearings and stuff like that, well, it is a shortcut. I'm not too bothered, and these gearboxes aren't as hard to take out once you know how to do it as a lot of people think they are. So, I've already installed the flywheel in the car. Let me duck under there and show you. I do have to torque those bolts up. I'm not sure exactly what the torque is. I will look that up in just a minute and hopefully give you an answer. If not, I'll just do them all to the same torque and something pretty tight. You don't want those bolts coming loose. The biggest thing is just that they're all even at whatever torque you pick, but there is a set torque that they are supposed to be, and if you can get it to that, that is ideal. After those are torqued up, I'm going to use the clutch alignment tool, put the clutch in and the pressure plate. I'll show you how I use the tool. It's what the instructions on the back of the clutch alignment tool package said, and it worked fine in 318, so I'll show you how I do that. Once that's all installed, we'll start on the gearbox. Okay, I've got the flywheel bolts torqued up. See them in there? Look just the same as they did before. I torqued them in several different stages. I did put them all in pretty tightly, then all to about half the maximum torque, and then to full torque. Now, I've had trouble finding the exact torque that those bolts are supposed to be at, and the best I've come up with is two different numbers, either 78 or 88 foot-pounds.
my torque wrench only goes up to 80 foot-pounds. So I set it to 80 foot-pounds and torqued them all to 80 foot-pounds, which I believe is plenty tight enough. If you have a torque wrench that goes higher, maybe do it to 85, or maybe you can find an exact number for your engine. I am happy with that for myself, and I believe it'll work fine. Now, what a lot of people do, and if you are lucky enough to have the special tool, there's a little plate that bolts to the back of the engine along part of where the gearbox surround bolts on and holds the flywheel in place so you can torque it down. I don't have that. Some people make their own. What I did was I just put a wrench on the front of the crankshaft in the front of the engine and held that steady while I torqued the bolts down, and that seemed to work great. Now I'm going to show you how to install the clutch alignment tool in the clutch and clutch pressure plate, and then mount the whole thing onto the flywheel under there. What you want to do is set the clutch with the side that faces towards the back of the car up. Then you're going to take the clutch pressure plate and set it on top of the clutch, like so. And you can see the splines in there. Just get it roughly lined up correctly. Now what you're going to do is take your clutch alignment tool. Now mine looks like this. Yours may look very different. This is just how I use my tool. This was about $20 from the local auto parts store. What you do with this one is this little tip here is interchangeable. You get the correct size so that it fits, not tightly, but like there's not too much play. So if I put it in there, you can see it's kind of like it fits there, and there's probably maybe a millimeter, 1 to 2 millimeters of extra play in it. Anyway, you set that down in there like so, and then for me it's the top knob is turned to tighten. Tighten, tighten, tighten. It's a little bit hard to do this with one hand. And you want that not ridiculously tight, but tight. And what that does is expand that lower plastic piece. You might even be able to almost see it in there, so that it expands and holds the splines in the clutch plate. Sorry. Now what we're going to do is take this most knob and tighten that, and what this will do is tighten on the pressure plate spring here. And what we want to do is not get that super tight, but tight enough it'll hold it. Now what we're going to do is turn this over, and I can't do that with one hand, so I'm going to have to set the camera down. Maybe you'll be able to kind of see it as I do it. But you're going to turn the clutch over and line up the clutch edge. I'll show you here. The edge of the clutch with the edge of the pressure plate contact surface. So I'll turn over and show you as much as I can without holding the camera. So hopefully this works. So with it turned over, you can see it's actually pretty close to lined up along there, but it's a little bit out. So I'm just going to move the clutch around a little bit until it's as lined up as it can be. Then tighten that lowermost knob again to get it pretty tight. And then all I do is put this on the flywheel and put the bolts in. I'm going to turn off the camera now, and once the bolts are in, show you the removal of the tool and the torquing. The bolts are in. They are not tight, but they are threaded in, so this definitely won't come off, without loosening them. What we're going to do now is tighten these bolts up to torque, and then remove the alignment tool. Now, basically what you're doing with the pressure plate is these bolts are holding a large flat spring onto the flywheel with the clutch in between them. So if you tighten this bolt, and you'll probably feel it when you put the pressure plate on, if you tighten this bolt or any of the other bolts all the way without tightening the rest of them equally, you're going to end up with the spring at an angle like that, and it's going to throw your clutch out of alignment.
So what you want to do is tighten each one and try to keep the spring as flat as possible as it goes onto the flywheel. So you just tighten them all progressively together until they are at torque. Now, the closest I've been able to find to the specified torque is around 27 foot-pounds. So I'm going to set my torque wrench to probably 25. If that doesn't feel quite tight enough, I'll probably put it up to something around 30. That's probably what I'll finish with, is about 30. But somewhere between 25 and 30 should be fine. If you want to do it tighter, it's up to you. The main thing is just to have them all the same. Alright, the bolts are all torqued up now. And one trick that you can use when you're torquing bolts, and you are wanting, of course, to do them in a cross pattern, is once a bolt is torqued, use a marker and just put a slash across it. Now, I haven't done that here because the marker is over there and I can remember the pattern because there's only 6 bolts. But if it's complicated pattern or you have a lot of bolts, what I did with the flywheel was actually just number them in the pattern I wanted to torque them in, 1 through 8. And so it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Just a little tip if you are torquing your bolts. Alright, the next thing to do is remove this. So the way we are going to do that is, now this is one thing, now I have not loosened this here at all, and you can see the difference there is in there. That's how much those bolts have taken up. So you can imagine that if you only torqued one bolt all the way and all the rest were loose, how much of an angle that would put that on and push the whole thing out of alignment. So that's why it's so important to torque these evenly. But what we're going to do is just wind that off some more so that has some room, and then take this top nut here and twist that loose, and then push it in, pull it out. It loosens that there, and all slides out of the clutch, and it should all be nice and aligned. That's the theory anyway. Alright, what we're going to do now is stick the clutch, sorry, not the clutch, the gearbox up in here, and probably just before we do that, what I'm going to do is get some of this wiring here and just zip tie it up out of the way. You could, I guess, cut all this wiring out, but in case we need to use any of these pins to fool the computer into thinking the transmission's still here, if we cannot just bypass the computer, we're going to leave these in case we need to do that, or in case someone ever decides to put an automatic back in here. It's all hooked up. Not sure why anyone would want to do that, but maybe at some point it will be worth, or, yeah, it's just easier. So we'll zip tie those up out of the way, and I'll get the gearbox on the jack and under here, and then I'll show you how we're going to line it up and put it in place. For installing the gearbox, a few things I'd recommend. Firstly, if the transmission rear mount is not ready connected to the transmission, now is a good time to connect it. The reason for that is if you wait until it's under the car, once this is lined up with the back of the engine, this flange here, if you then have to add this to take the weight from the rear, you're going to be working around a jack at least, and possibly going to be stressing the input shaft on the transmission if that takes any of the weight. Throughout this whole process, really the only thing you have to be careful of is, I'll move around here so you can see it, that input shaft. If that takes the weight of the transmission, it could bend, which of course would make the whole engine vibrate and not be nice. Cause all kinds of problems. So, now's a good time to add the rear mount. And also, if your shifter is still connected, remove the shifter. So it's that bolt there, or sometimes it's a clip or something. This is a E46 gearbox, and I'm using a E39 520 shifter, so this bolt probably isn't standard hardware. It was sent along by the wreckers probably to make it work. Also, I would recommend putting on, if I can find it, this. This is the rubber mount that goes between this flange here and the end of the drive shaft.
and I guess gives it a little bit of movement to soak up bumps and stuff like that. So if you connect it now, it'll save you having to do it under the car. So I'm going to do it now. As you can see, it's already on the jack. I'll probably line it up a little bit better before I get it under there. And it's possible that this will be too high to fit under here. So I may have to actually slide the transmission under into the center tunnel here and then put it up on the jack and slide it forward. This whole process is highly recommended to have two people. One to move the jack forward, one to line it up, and if possible even another one to hit it with a hammer. The main thing you'll need to hit with a hammer is possibly the starter motor to get that moved and lined up, or someone leaning into the engine bay to move the starter motor. So I'm going to try to do this solo. We'll see how it goes. I did the 318 by myself. Had to be creative, but got it done and drives fine. So see how this goes. I'll get those mounts on and that flange and be right back. Alright, the shifter is now in place. It is not bolted in, but this pin here is through there, though I have not yet put the clip on it. What I want to show you is how to install this clip here that holds the back of the shifter in place. Now this, I don't know if it's a new part or it was likely a replacement part for the car that this came off of. If that is useful to anybody, I believe that is the part number. This says it's made in the Czech Republic. So anyway, the way this works is this is a bushing. It's got this rubber mount in there, and if your shifter has lots of movement in it, like if it's loose in gear or whatever, it's likely that this part here that I said was supposed to be held rigid isn't. It has a little bit of movement in it, and that's probably because this part here is worn out. What I want to show you is how it is installed into this part here, to that clip that's welded onto the car. You need to line this up. Now, the way you do that is you look on one side of it, and you'll see how it's actually got this little cutaway in the back of it. So that part faces towards the rear of the car, and you'll see that if you look up in this bracket, one side here is flat, and one side is curved. If you look on here, you'll see the front of this is curved, and it has this cutout. That cutout goes up against that flat part there. Now, what you'll need to do is have this front end all in place. It doesn't have to be bolted in, but all in place like that. And then you'll want to take this with the cutout facing up and towards the rear, put it over the pin on the back of the shifter. Push this forward here. And lift it up into place. Now you can hopefully see it's not quite far enough forward, so I actually have to push it on there a little bit more. And it's tight. Anyway, what I'm going to do is just try to show you. Now you can see it's under the paper, so you can see kind of that ridge there. That ridge will click up into that edge of the bracket. So what you want to do is try to get this at kind of an angle. Get one of those in, and then just push it up until the other one's in. Now I'm going to try to set the camera down on my chest as I push this up, so hopefully it'll be on camera. We'll see how it goes. Try to get this lined up. Alright, hopefully this works. Get the shifter boot up there. Push this so it lines up. Alright, this might be off camera now. Push that up so it clicks in place. Hopefully you saw that. If not, sorry, I don't have more than two hands. Anyway, that's it in place there. So you hopefully heard it click into place. You see that's just ahead of that there. It's firm, it's not going anywhere. That's all in place. That's the way it should be. Alright, moving up to the front. What I'm going to do now is install the bolt through there and put the little clip on the shifter, and that will be done. This is the shifter mechanism once it is removed from the transmission. Now I've already gone ahead and taken it apart, but this is basically what it looked like. I have also cut off these wires and stripped them back. If we remove the cover, it's just casting, it's just grease in there, and those lines are just slightly raised to apply pressure to this, I'll call it a pendulum, which moves back and forth like so. Now when the shifter linkage moves, this arm here moves. So it turns on here and moves that. Each of these wires is somehow connected to each of these little copper strips. If I get an angle here, you can see there's 5 rows, and some of the rows, for example the second one here, is not continuous. The first row, which is, we'll say the first row is the outermost, so the outermost row, or the first one, is continuous. The fourth and fifth rows, so the 2 innermost rows, are also continuous. However, the middle 2 are not. So what I'm going to do now, oh, and one more thing before I forget, take this pin here out with a pendulum, and see there's 3 holes, 3 little spaces. Now what was in there were little copper pins or little bars that would, when this was in its range of motion, span between those copper strips. So basically that first hole, when the copper was in there, would have jumped the first 2 rows. The second space would have jumped the third and fourth rows, and the fifth space, as it overlaps, would have jumped the fourth and fifth. So you have one jumper for first and second, another jumper for let's see, third and fourth, and one for fourth and fifth. As far as I can see, nothing ever jumps between second and third. So the first 2 rows are independent, and the last 3 rows can at some point be all connected together. What this system does is allow you to have many gear selections with only a few wires, or fewer wires than you would. And so by what pattern electricity can flow through these, it tells it what gear it's in. Kind of a clever system, but a little bit complicated to figure out how to bypass it. The good news is that as far as I can tell, there's no resistors or no digital signal coming from this, so it will be a matter of just splicing wires together once I figure out what pattern these go in to get the signal I want. Now, I'll put this pendulum back in there. What I have to do is figure out which of these wires corresponds to which of these rows, and if the split rows are actually continuous and just not on the surface. Once I figure that out, I will figure out what, when it's on this side is in park, what connectivity is between the rows, etc., and try to splice it all together. It's going to be a little bit time consuming and a little bit mind numbing, but hopefully I'll be able to sort something. Before I spend too much time on this, I'm actually going to have a look up on the internet and see if there's any pinouts that says, the orange, yellow, and black wires spliced together makes it think it's in park, something like that. So I'm going to have a look at that first, but if not, I'm going to be checking connectivity and splicing it together. In case you're doing this on a transmission that is not this version of Jayco transmission, I will just show you quickly how to check connectivity between and see which wire goes to which thing. The reason I'm doing this one instead of just looking is they've put some sort of like sealant. It's like just a glue there. That's not a panel. It's actually just like filled with glue. So they've like wired it and then just put basically a really top quality version of hot glue across it and sealed it in. So the only way to get that off would be to cut it. So what you'll need is a voltmeter. Let me switch camera hands. My hand's greasy. And you want to go to the resistance setting. So that's that little symbol there. So that's volts AC, volts DC, and resistance. So we'll go up to that one, like that, and grab our 2 pins. Doesn't matter which order they go in. And if you put, trying to do this with one hand is rather difficult. I'll just try to spin that on there. Hopefully it stays. Alright, so that's on the red wire. It's no longer on the red wire. But let me just explain this. Alright, it's too hard to do on camera. I'll just explain it. You put that on one side, put your other pin, and just go across the terminals like so until you find one where it says it has resistance. Now, because this is all copper and it'll have very low resistance, but right now you can say it says it has infinite resistance because there's no connectivity between them. But if I touch them across this vise here, you'll see it's going up to some resistance. Alright, so when you see a number come up, you know you have resistance, and hopefully not a lot of resistance, but there will be some resistance, and that means you have a circuit, so on and so forth. So let me go look it up. If not, I'll be playing with this for probably about 3 hours, try to get the wiring done, and then I have to figure out a way of splicing the reverse wire from the transmission into these to make it go to reverse, and hence have all the backup lights, etc. come on, and also be able to think it's in neutral so that the it'll start. So off to do that. So I've had a look on the internet, and as far as I can see, there are no articles or, sorry, the water pump just kicked in, articles or photos on the wiring pinouts for this switch. So I'm just going to show you how I'm going to solve this. I won't film me solving it because it's probably kind of going to be a long, boring process. Anyway, there are, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different copper bands and 5 wires. So once I figure out which wire connects to which band, or possibly some wires connect to multiple bands, or possibly some of these are merely bridges, because as I said before, this arm bridges between them, so hopefully you get the idea. So what I do is I have 5 different writing utensils, from a marker, pen, different colored pen, and a pencil, and so I have 5 different things there. I'm going to check the connectivity between each of these and its corresponding band, and make that shape on the paper with that utensil representing a certain color wire. Then I will have that pattern basically transferred to here, except I will be able to clearly see which band corresponds with which wire. I then merely have to put this in a certain selector position, imagine which things it jumps, and then I can see what wire combination it is. Hopefully this won't take too long. I believe that this is the quickest way of doing it, and if my math is right, with 5 wires there will be 120 possibilities, which is way too many to do by trial and error, and it's possible you would cook the auto transmission computer. So that's how I'm doing it. Just thought I'd show you that. I'm going to get started. Hopefully I'll come up with the result, and we'll take it down to the car and try it out. Alright, I believe I have finished. We are about to test it. What I have here is just a rough diagram. It's quickly done, but you can see these bands here represent the different strips. The different colors and patterns represent different wire colors. Down here I have what pattern of wires I believe represents park, reverse, and neutral. An automatic transmission will start in park or neutral, but not in any other gear. What I then did was, all of them have a common color, that is black. All gears have a black. So what I believe it works like is you have a positive black, and then the other 4 wires in a combination represent the gear. So both neutral, park, and reverse, which are the ones I'm interested in, all have a black. So I put black down for all of them, and they all have a gray. Now, neutral and park have red, and neutral has yellow, whereas park has, what's that, white. Alright? So, by varying whether you put the yellow or white in, varies whether it thinks it's a neutral or park. If it has red as in the with neither yellow or white, it'll think it's in reverse. But as far as I can tell, just black and gray is what it thinks the wire combination for reverse. Hopefully that makes sense. So, with it written like this, what I'm thinking is have black and gray always spliced together, and have red and yellow spliced in as well, but have a switch in there, and when it's put in reverse, it breaks that circuit, so it goes into reverse mode. That's the plan. I have to try to wire it up. So, to do that, this is our 8-pin connector that took off, that used to go to the shifter. I've cut the wires, have black, gray, yellow, red, and white. And over here somewhere, this is the connector that goes onto the gearbox. At least I hope it is. Maybe I've got the wrong connector, but should be it. Just a 2-pin connector like that, and the wires. So I'm going to splice those into a switch somehow to open that circuit when the gearbox is in reverse. Try to get this all right. So first thing I have to do is just check on the gearbox by plugging this switch in and seeing whether when it's in reverse it's an open circuit or a closed circuit. Hopefully it is try to get this right, a open circuit when it's in reverse. Try to think this all through. Anyway, I'll wire it all up and show you what I've done after I've done it. But I just want to show you the idea I went through with this and kind of what I'm aiming for. What I'm doing now is wiring in the reverse switch so it makes the car think it's in reverse when it is. We have our 8-pin connector that we're using from the transmission. This is cut off the transmission. We have our 5 wires that used to go into the selector switch on the side of the transmission. And over here somewhere, this is the connector that goes onto the side of the manual transmission for the reverse switch. Now, this is all for the Jayco transmission. If you have a different transmission, this probably doesn't apply. For the Jayco transmission, we have 5 wires here, and what I want is the black and gray wires always connected together, and for all operation except for reverse, we'll call it an orange and yellow wire connected not only together, but to these other wires as well. So all 4 of these wires will be all spliced into one connector for normal operation except for reverse. For reverse, all we want connected together are the black and gray wires. No other wires connected to these. So, let me say one more thing. As far as I know, having the yellow and orange wires connected together all the time won't be an issue for reverse. If it is, I'll have to figure out somewhere around that. But as far as I know, it's if they come back to the black wire that it becomes an issue. So, these wires are always connected together, and for normal operation, all 4 of the wires connected together. Now, for the reverse switch, when you put the transmission in reverse, you close a switch that completes the circuit between these 2 wires here. What we're trying to do here is when we want it in reverse, we're actually opening a circuit. So there's no connectivity between these 2 sets of wires. To do that, I'm going to use this relay. Now this is not a standard relay. It's easy to acquire. Any auto parts store will have one. But if you look at here, it has 5 pins instead of 4 pins. That's very important. If we look at the little diagram here, see how it works. In normal operation, pin 30 and 87A are connected. So with no power going through it whatsoever, if you plug something into pin 30 and 87A, you'll have connectivity. However, if power goes through the coil side, so when power comes through here, so when the put in reverse and power completes this circuit, it closes and power no longer goes to 87A, and it pulls it down and closes the circuit with just 87, in effect breaking that initial circuit. Show you guys back here. Alright, hopefully that makes sense. If not, you can look up an article on how relays work. It's pretty simple if you look up a diagram of it, which this one is not a very good one. Anyway, so the way I'm going to wire it up is I have to find a power source on the car that will be on whenever the car is on. Then I have to run or splice into it one of these wires going to the switch on the manual transmission. The other end of this wire will go into, if I zoom in on this, that right there, which is pin 85, and then I'll have another wire going from 86 to ground. So we'll have a circuit there whenever it's in reverse. When it's not in reverse, we won't have a circuit. Then I'm going to take one group of these wires, so these two wires here or those two wires there, and put them on 30, and then the other one on 37A. So with normal operation, with no power going through the relay, it thinks it's in neutral. When we put it in reverse, it activates the magnetic coil and pulls or opens that circuit. We don't need anything on 87, which would be what it would be closing to when there's power going through the relay, because we just want this to be an open circuit. That's the way I'm going to wire it. It should work. I'm going to wire this all up, get it all taped up and neat, put it on the car. I'll find a 12-volt power source. Just any 12-volt power source will do, so long as it's on when the car's on, and test it out. Wiring is now complete. I have ditched the relay I showed you in the last clip for this snazzy purple one. This is from the fuse box of an E36 that I had lying around, and the reason I swapped them is the one I got from the auto parts store was junk. I'm not sure what's wrong with it exactly, but both, basically pins 87 and 87A were always connected together, which they shouldn't have been, and it worked like a normal relay. It didn't have the function I wanted. This one here, camera's probably not going to show it, but it has exactly the same diagram on it as on the one I showed you before, but this one actually works like it should. When I put in the other relay, basically it always thought it was in reverse, unless of course it went into reverse and then it thought it was in neutral. So that was no good for what I wanted. This one now works perfectly, as I shall now demonstrate. If I turn the key to position 2, you'll see it is in neutral, and if I push this over and up for reverse, it goes into reverse, and the mirror tilts down, and the lights come on in the back, etc., etc. And I'll pull it out of reverse, and it goes over to neutral, mirror comes back up, lights go out, and everything is happy. So, that's all worked. I have, now I'll just show you where I've got the switched 12-volt power and ground. What I did was I took one of these bolts here. As you recall, there were 3, one there, and one there, that held in, I think, a shifter mechanism for the auto. And I just cut it in half and used that as the ground for the relay switch circuit for the reverse switch on the transmission. The switched 12-volt power came from this little connector. I'll just turn the car off. That went into the shifter selector. I'm not sure why it has 6 pins or what they all do. There are 2 yellow and red wires. They're kind of bright colors. Those are both constant 12-volt powers. I don't believe that those would work. They will work, like they'll do what you want it to do, but the problem is that because they're constant 12-volt power, you have a very high risk of running the battery flat. So the wire you want is the purple and white wire. And the way you test is just cut it, get the car side, obviously not the switch side, stick the multimeter in it. It should have no power when the car's off. When the car goes to accessory or position 2, it should have 12-volt power. That one did. Wired it all up, so I wired that directly into one side of the reverse switch. Then it goes to the transmission reverse switch, then comes up into the relay. And then on the other side of that, the relay goes to ground. I have a circuit. Then the other side goes to the 8-pin connector. Hopefully that all makes sense. Anyway, it all works. I'm happy. What we're going to do now is just zip tie up underneath the car. Some things are hanging a little bit loose, and should be finished with that. Then I'm just waiting for the shift knob to come. And on to what size diff you need for your manual conversion for a E39 6-cylinder. The factory manual ratio is 2.93, which is what this diff here is. This is from a 528i 96 and is a 2.93 ratio. This is all written by the records I got from. The way you can tell the ratio of your diff is by looking at this little sticker here. And if I can get in on there, hopefully that's focused. See, this is 2.93. That's the ratio. Over on this diff here, it's a slightly different styled sticker, but that number there, 3.64, that's the ratio. Now, the manual cars, as far as I know, all came with a 2.93 ratio. Some of the 520s may have come with a slightly lower ratio, but as far as I know, all E39 6-cylinders came with that ratio. The automatic E39s came with multiple ratios depending on the automatic transmission they had in. There were options for ZF transmissions, GM transmissions, and Jatco, which is a Nissan transmission, and there may have even been a few other options. The type of transmission that came in the E39 was mostly dependent on the region to which that car was being shipped. For example, all the ones being sold in Japan came with Nissan transmissions. I have 2 such transmissions there. The Nissan ones happen to be junk, and yeah, they have a shift error and blow up after a while. Usually about the time they're 15, 20 years old, which is really annoying when you buy one. Anyway, the Jatco transmission ones from Japan usually come with this ratio here. This is what was in my E39 528 that this video is about. It is a 3.64 ratio, as I mentioned before, and with the manual conversion, revved at about 3,400. About 3,400 at 100 k's an hour or 62 miles an hour. Just to give you an idea of ratios. It was perfectly drivable, other than it was revving higher than I thought ideal at highway speeds. The worst part about driving it with this diff in it was first gear was a little bit low to start in. It was just a little bit too low, but second gear was just too high to start in. So you're kind of in between gears whenever you started at an intersection. The only time it was helpful was on a hill start, but even then it was just too low, and then it just didn't feel right. So I ordered this diff here, and I discovered that not all E39 diffs are exactly the same. I believe this one here is obviously from a 528, but it must have had the ZF transmission instead of the GetRag transmission, which is what I used in this manual conversion, as the drive shaft is slightly different. My drive shaft, even though it's from a manual car, will not line up with this input flange. Also, as you can see, I'll try to do a size comparison because I don't have a ruler here, but 2 fingers fit in there, whereas on the automatic one, I can't fit 2 fingers in there at all. And so the length is slightly different. Whether that would affect the drive shaft, I don't know, because the drive shaft itself wouldn't fit on this flange. The bolt holes are slightly different. I could have drilled it out to make it fit, but it wasn't worth it, and I ended up using another automatic diff. That diff I ended up using was from a ZF 5 HP 18 transmission. The car
came with that transmission, and I used the diff from that. That ratio is a 3:1:5 ratio. So that's between these two. So it means it revs higher than the factory automatic would, but substantially lower than the original automatic diff from the same car. So at 100 Ks, it now revs at about 2,900, which I think is pretty good. First gear, second gear, third gear, all fall where I think is good for that size car, and it is fun to drive. For installing the clutch pedal, I tried several different things. The first thing I tried was using a left-hand drive 540 pedal cluster. That did not work, as there was interference with the steering column, and even though they look kind of similar, the left-hand drive ones do not suit right-hand drive cars. I found that out. It was interesting trying it, but it didn't work, so I moved on. The clutch pedals and I believe also the brake pedals, are a different shape between the left-hand drive and the right-hand drive. So if you are ordering a replacement part, please check and make sure that it is correct for your car, especially if you are in New Zealand or another country where you use right-hand drive, as the default might be left-hand drive. Anyway, what I ended up doing was using the return spring, so that spring there, and the master cylinder from the left-hand drive 540 pedal cluster. The 540 clutch master cylinder works fine, and so does that return spring. Now, that return spring might be a little bit heavier than a standard 528. I'm not sure on that, but it works fine, and the clutch feel is pretty good. That bracket there with the hole in it is for the clutch sensor. Now, as this car was an automatic, obviously, it didn't have that sensor there, and that's primarily so the for the cruise control, this car doesn't have cruise control fitted, so the wiring for fitting a manual conversion and retaining cruise control, I don't have that information yet. If I do a manual conversion on a car that does have cruise control, I will try to retain that function, and will do a update at that point. Anyway, there is, at least in my installation, no switch for the clutch. So if you wanted to, you could put a bypass in so that the car doesn't start unless the clutch is depressed or something like that. Anyway, what I did for the clutch pedal itself was go to the BMW dealer and order a replacement clutch pedal. It was about $80 New Zealand, and it just fits on the standard pedal cluster housing. Now, I have a New Zealand E39 pedal cluster here, but without the pedals, and it is missing the throttle pedal shaft. I pulled that out, and as you can see, this is the the brake pedal pin, and this is the clutch pedal pin. With an automatic car, the brake pedal is just larger, and there's no clutch, obviously. If you want to use the same set here, but make it manual, what I suggest is do what I did and use the rubber, I'm not going to show you this rubber cover for the pedal. Use that as a template for your brake pedal, and just cut down your brake pedal and put that over it. I am an engineer, so I cut it with an angle grinder, and it worked very well. You can get an angle grinder for about $100 if you don't have one, and just trim that down using this as a template. Fit this over it, and it fits very tightly. There's no movement in that whatsoever, and other than that rubber piece, which is obviously different than the automatic one, there's no cost. The left-hand drive rubbers do fit right-hand drive pedals, if you're interested. The throttle might be slightly different, but I doubt it. The clutch rubber also fits, and I just put that on from the 540 left-hand drive
pedal set. And as I mentioned before, that spring transfers across, and in the automatic housing here, there is already pre-drilled holes and mounts for, sorry, it's off camera, the clutch master cylinder. So those are already all pre-drilled and ready to go. For the actual installation of the clutch master cylinder, you will need to drill a hole to run the clutch line. Unlike the E36, there is not a pre-drilled hole, at least on the right-hand drive cars. It's possible left-hand drive cars are different, but all the cars I have, none of them are pre-drilled, pre or post facelift. So, I had to drill a hole. That hole, I will try to get the camera back up in here so you can see, is, sorry for the shaking, to get behind that spring, there. So, you see where the bottom of the clutch master cylinder is, then the pipe comes out, there's a little clip-in fitting, then the pipe comes out, and I've bent it around to go in that hole. Now that hole is ugly, and as I said, I was working in a shed at the time, I didn't have the best access to that, and I wanted it done, so I knocked a hole in it. The best tools I found to use were pre-drill it with the largest drill bit you can get, ideally a 13 or even a little bit larger, and then use a die grinder to open it up and smooth it out. At some point, probably when I put in a new clutch, I will pull that clutch line out and smooth out that hole and put a rubber bung in it. But as it is, there's enough clearance. It doesn't look like it at this camera angle, but if I could get around a little bit more, you'd see that there is enough clearance that it's not going to rub on it or cut through that line. So it is safe, and I have touched up the paint around that edge so it's not going to rust or cause any issues like that. I'll now go around and show you what it looks like on the other side. I have opened this all back up so you can see. Probably not a lot. The clutch line comes out underneath the brake booster, and it's actually slightly up from the bottom of the brake booster, so once it comes through the hole it needs to bend down along underneath the brake booster and then come up this side. Now when you do this, I very strongly recommend that you remove the whole brake booster assembly. I'm not sure if it's possible to do it with this still in place. I didn't find it possible, and even if it is, it will save you an immense amount of time if you just go ahead and remove it. To do that, you need to remove those two fittings there. They're the brake lines that go to the ABS pump. Some of them it may be easier just to remove directly from the pump. It depends which way you prefer to do it, really. Anyway, once those are removed, it will drain a lot of brake fluid down here. Brake fluid is corrosive, so please at least do not allow it to sit on the paint. If it touches it at all, ideally put something down there to catch it, and if you have some sort of suction device, remove as much brake fluid as you can before disconnecting those lines, and it'll mean there's minimal drainage. Once those lines are disconnected and these hoses or wires above it have been unplugged and out of the way, there are 2 or 4 nuts depending on your car. I'm not sure if it's a regional thing or just a model thing or just whatever design they happen to use that day, but some have only 2 bolts, some have 4. I believe the 540 left-hand drive pedal set I got only had 2, but it did have these holes in the back for 4, and then I could just drill them out. But anyway, so you'll have 2 or 4. I believe they're about a 13 mil nut. You'll need to remove those. If I get up in there, you can see the 2 bottom ones there, and then just pull that pin out from the brake pedal, obviously, and then that whole booster brake assembly should just slide out. It might take a little bit of fiddling to get it right out, but it's not really that hard.
Once that's out, you'll have a reasonable amount of room to work in here. Mark out that hole as accurately as you can, drill it, clean it up, and you will probably have to bend that line a little bit. Now, onto the clutch line I used. I couldn't find a E39 manual clutch line. The only one I had supplied from the wreckers was a E36 hard clutch line. That did not fit and didn't have the right fitting for that clutch master cylinder. So I believe it was about $50 from the BMW dealer. I got the factory clutch line that goes with that special clip-on fitting from the clutch master cylinder, and the piece is about, say, 150, 200 millimeters long, probably about 200 millimeters long, and it's a hard line ending in a screw fitting where it would then connect to the remainder of the factory hard line. It's bent in kind of a funny shape, but so long as you don't kink it and bend it around something with a gentle radius, you can bend it to new shapes, as I have done here. I got that, clipped that obviously into the clutch master cylinder, ran it to here, put all this back in place, and then what I did was I went to the local clutch shop and had them make up a brake line with the appropriate fittings for there and where it fits onto the clutch slave cylinder, and I believe I had 1.5 to 2 meters of line. This is just the rubber brake line like would go between the end of the hard line and your brake caliper. The total cost of that, I believe, was about $60 New Zealand to have that line made up. And the huge advantage of having a long flex line like that is you can run it anywhere. As you can see, I've run it up, around here, down there, and then I can just zip tie it to hoses and wires as it goes, and it fit very nicely and is very easy to run. When I finish the conversion on my E36 328, I'm doing the same thing. Instead of using the hard line, it's just a lot easier to run, and because clutch line pressure is quite a bit lower than brake pressure, you don't have that squishy feeling that you would if you tried to run a line that long that wasn't braided for brakes. If you ran a soft line like that for brakes, the brake feel wouldn't be good, but because it's such lower pressure, you can't feel it at all. It feels just like the hard line. Anyway, once that's done, put back together. If you don't touch up the paint, that's fairly important, and do check to make sure there isn't any brake fluid residue, or it will eat into your paint and cause major rust issues. You are good to go. If you do not have a parts car to work from, I would suggest just go to a dealer or possibly a place like, I can't remember the name offhand. It's anyway, the American supplier that you get all the BMW parts from. I cannot for the life of me remember the name offhand. Anyway, go to them if they sell it. Get the clutch pedal, the rubbers, and the spring and clutch master cylinder, and you should be good to go. The little clips that hold on the end there, hopefully you can see that, you should be able just to go to a local hardware store and pick those up, as they're pretty common. If I can go to my local parts store, which doesn't even sell Imperial bolts, and get those clips, you should be able to pretty much anywhere. So that was it for the clutch installation. Out of the whole manual conversion process, that is the most involved process and requires the most tools. What I used was a drill and a die grinder. Pretty simple, and it just takes a little bit of care setting up. Give yourself a few hours to do that, and don't try using left-hand drive parts on a right-hand drive car.
I have been asked to show the differences between the 540 and the 6-cylinder E39s and how they're different relating to a manual conversion. This is my current 540, and as you can see, it has had a bit of a bump. I bought it like this and am in the process of fixing it. This wheel assembly, I'll just show you this briefly, has been smashed, and hopefully you can see in there the lower control arm has actually smashed and shredded the wheel hub there. Hopefully you can see that. Anyway, I'm in the process of fixing all that, but this is indeed a 540, and I probably won't end up doing a manual conversion on this specific car, but when I get that wheel hub fixed and get it down to my workshop, I will jack it up and show you completely underneath the car exactly how it's different than the E39 6-cylinder cars.